And this time, they had the weapons of mass destruction. They had mustard gas. They came in with 500,000 soldiers. And so the Ethiopians did not prevail. But Emperor Haile Selassie was able to escape. And he went to the world, the League of Nations, to plead the case of Ethiopia. Ethiopia was one of the only independent nations in Africa at that point. You had Liberia, which was semi-independent. You had Sierra Leone. But for the most part, Africa was under colonial control.
Oh yeah, heavily.
But Ethiopians fight, and they're coming to the world bodies and saying that we want help, spurred on the nationalism that we have today, spurred on renewed Garvey movement, spurred on African leaders who felt the call. And Nkrumah was in the United States at this time, and so he was at school at Lincoln. W.E.B. Du Bois was calling for help for Africa at this time, and so Lincoln University is near Philadelphia, where Du Bois was a factor. And then there was a friend of ours who moved, Nkrumah, who was a student then of religion. He came over from Africa to become a preacher. But then this African consciousness exploded on him in the late 30s, and he was able to go to Washington to meet with the brothers in Washington. And who was there? You had what they called the Hansberry Group. And Leo Hansberry was one of our great professors at Howard. He raised the banner of Africa in the 30s. And so when Ethiopia was attacked, these brothers would be meeting and planning, how can we support Ethiopia? And one of those brothers was Ralph Bunche, Dr. Ralph Bunche, who had the office next to Leo Hansberry. And so they inspired Nkrumah and taught Nkrumah about this global community, and that moved Nkrumah off the path of trying to be a preacher to becoming a great African leader. But the Philadelphia connection with our college in Pennsylvania was added to
Lincoln University.
Lincoln University was added to the connection in Washington with Howard University, and that's two points of the African pyramid of consciousness. And the signal point, the top point, was coming to New York. And New York, Harlem was the African village, and you had the various African study groups, African history groups. And Nkrumah got a full...
And what era was this? What time
was
period?
at the end of the 1930s. And that's when Haile Selassie had
the Harlem Renaissance and all that was jumping on.
It was the Harlem Renaissance and the fight to support Haile Selassie, and a strong leftist movement, creative movement. Paul Robeson was emerging as a creative genius. And so, and our sisters were establishing their power and beauty in the various areas of academics, of economics. You had the women that were producing hair products and hair care, and they were the millionaires. You had the black banks and the black, and the fraternal orders and whatnot. So this was a rising period for black folks. But then Ethiopia was the signal that there was a fascist, racist component emerging. Spain started off in the 30s, and then Hitler picked it up in the late 30s. And so Ethiopia's plea that if you lose Ethiopia, other devastations will take place. And sure enough, by 1939, the Germans invaded Poland and Czechoslovakia, and eventually they were coming in France, and they took Paris, and then they were trying to get England, and they at war with Russia. And so the death and destruction of World War II delayed the rise of African peoples, and had this white-on-white death, tens of millions of people. But out of that death rose a new European world around the United Nations. But out of that death also rose, because many Africans died in the process, out of that death rose a new consciousness of what African people should be. And that's what we've been building on. And so as we go forth, the meeting that Minister Farrakhan called, and he went diligently around the nation getting people ready. and the hundreds of thousands of millions came, and there were millions who wanted to come but could not. And he's touched a spark in our people to get it together as a family. And it's more than just your religious traditions or the rituals that you observe. We are the mothers and fathers of the human family, so we have to provide a new day
human
and a
family.
new way. The human family.
Yeah.
A new day and a new way. And that's what this symbol of our new day and new way represents. So we've had conferences here. We had a world festival in 2011 in which I was asked to bring in 50 of the top black minds to join thousands of others from the world. So there was a month. This was the third time that they've had this world festival of African beauty, African strength, African intelligence. The first one was in 1966, and my wife and I were living in Africa at that time. I was doing my PhD work, so we traded our apartment in Abidjan, the capital of the Ivory Coast, for an apartment in Senegal. And so we were there for the whole 30 days of this festival. And at that point, they honored the two great minds of the 20th century. And one of them honored was an African-American, W.E.B. Du Bois, and the other honored was a Senegalese, Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop. And they had our culture on display, our art, and our intelligence. And so President Senghor and others had created in the 30s a consciousness movement called Negritude. But then other leaders like Dr. Diop, that our brother just pointed out, they went deeper into the economics. They had a more progressive tradition, not just of African socialism. They had a deep understanding of the Marxist traditions and whatnot. So they synthesized all of this into this new thrust of Pan-Africanism, taking the traditions of the past and taking the history of our great ancestral accomplishments and taking the death and destruction of slavery and colonialism, and out of that forge a new nation. That symbol of the Tekken, the obelisk, the George Washington Monument, if you will, that symbol represents two brothers in a death and destruction conflict, and one brother killing the other. And then the brother was, in one symbolic story, was cut up into 14 pieces. And in another symbolic knowledge, two sisters that were married to the brothers formed a sisterhood of life. They didn't conflict with each other. And they went throughout the Nile and found 13 of the 14 pieces. And this womanhood to restore and to rebuild and regenerate this principle in the universe is told in a story of African history that these women found the 13 pieces and they were about to complete the resurrection, but the one piece was missing. And the penis, so the story goes, had been eaten by the Nile catfish. But that did not stop this woman principle, this male mother principle that produces life. They had commissioned out of the living rock of the Nile an erect symbol that would represent the erect penis, the 14th piece. And the founding of this nation is based upon that parable, that story, that message, that 13 pieces, 13 states was not enough to produce a new world order. They needed the 14th piece, and so Washington, D.C. was carved out of colonial America to be the 14th piece. And the symbol of the African tradition of rebirth and resurrection was put at the center, and that's the Washington Monument. And the African tradition in the learning center, a learning temple, was put into Washington, D.C. eventually with the Lincoln Memorial, a pillared temple with Lincoln sitting there like he is one of the pharaohs. And then...
And Deir al-Bahari.
Yes. And to complete this process, they have that mirror pool. That mirror pool is a part of the great temples in the Nile. And then to top it off on the hill, they had Capitol Hill, where they built the legislative, administrative heart of the nation. And that legislative administrative was built by our people, just as the White House was built by our people. And the Lady Liberty on the top, Lady Freedom on the top of the Capitol, was made in Europe in Rome, I believe, and sent to America. And it was a black man who knew how to properly
reassemble.
uncrate it and
That's right.
reassemble
That's-
it, and then
That's right.
find the means of putting it on the top
right.
of the Capitol.
That's right.
And in the Capitol rotunda, where they have the images of all the great people in this nation, and in that gallery is Rosa Parks, and in that gallery is Martin Luther King, with his head looking down, as if he's depressed at looking at all of these who maintain white supremacy while they were talking about freedom, justice, and equality. But in that gallery of greatness is a worked stone, a carved stone, carved in the tradition of the pharaoh's stone cutters. And that carved stone is a memorial to the African masons who carved the stones that became the United States Capitol.
The true Masons, the first builders of a stone structure
Come directly
on
out of,
planet Earth.
that's right. Come directly out of our tradition with our ancestors.
The true Masons.
And we name them and we claim them.
Yeah.
They are
And,
not Scottish
you know,
rites. They are not
no,
others. They are
No.
the original
no.
builders.
You
in stone.
cannot
Building for
go
eternity.
beyond the pyramid
Yes.
in reference to, and plus it was in the center of the universe. The latitude and longitude
That's right.
was so perfect it was only like a second off.
Right. It's,
So the mind of the people
yes.
that created that pyramid, that our
was hooked to
ancestors,
the divine order of the universe.
and Africa,
And
not
that's right.
the Middle East,
Yes.
in Africa.
Middle East is a fabrication used to explain a changed political development. But
Ooh.
Africa and the black man, as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad used to say, the Asiatic black man, have their deep root in Africa, and the spill out of Africa is that black population that runs through the Mesopotamia, runs to the Indus Valley in India, runs all the way out to Indonesia and into the islands of the Pacific.
Dr. Jeffries, you had such a role going on when you were talking about Harlem and that era in the 19th. I wanted to mention one of my heroes, James Vanderzee. James
Yes.
Vanderzee was the,
Photographer
that's right,
and the
that's
recorder of the history.
he inspires me.
Yes.
I'm in his spirit. I'm in his zone.
Right. And there was another one in the Vanderzee period, Elder Michaud, who had a bookstore on the African road.
1,000 books, a million books, or something like that.
It had everything. It was a 100. It was 125th Street and 7th Avenue.
Yeah.
That's where the statue of Adam Clayton Powell is,
Yeah.
and the state office.
Is it still
building.
there?
No, they built the state office building in its
Okay,
place.
okay.
And across from that is the Teresa Hotel, and that's where the African speakers on the ladder would be able to be speaking to the people. And at one point in the latter day, Dr. Ben was there, and in the latter day, Malcolm X was there. But the Teresa Hotel is also famous because when Fidel Castro had successfully led his people to a revolution in Cuba in 1959, and he wanted to come to the United Nations, they did not treat him right downtown. So Fidel came up to his African roots, and he came up and he stayed at the Teresa Hotel.